So when did he go into the other room and put your phone on the table by the couch?
I don't know.
Because he was always in the kitchen, right?
When he was leaving, I was listening, and he went into the kitchen.
In fact, you told Dr. Lubit, the most recent doctor you talked to, and you didn't tell Dr. Resnick this on August 19th, that you heard him open a drawer.
It's overruled.
Right?
I heard him making noise in the kitchen, yes.
Well, making noise by stomping around or making noise by opening a drawer. Which one is it?
Both.
Both. Now it's both. But you never told Dr. Resnick that, right?
I believe I did tell him that I heard him go into the kitchen, yes.
Did you tell him you heard him open a drawer?
I would have to look at what he wrote in his report. I can't, I'm sorry. It's been a really
Did you tell
long time.
Dr. Karpowicz you heard him open a drawer?
I heard him in the kitchen making noises in the kitchen. So that's what I would have told them.
And that's when you decide to grab this gun, right? That's your gun?
Yes, that's my gun.
And that's the gun that you kept on the windowsill?
Yes.
And that's the gun that you kept loaded
Yes.
with 10 shells?
Oh, yes.
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 Did you keep one in the chamber?
Yes, there is one in the chamber usually, yes.
So that gun, even though it doesn't have an external safety, was ready to pick up and fire, right?
Yes.
And that's the way you kept it just laying around. Yes?
Yes.
And you walked out of the bedroom, right?
Yes, I was trying to leave.
With that gun at your side.
Yes.
And you said today that Rob was, at that point in time, coming back towards the bedroom. Yes? You remember saying that today?
Yes, he was.
Do you remember testifying before? And you were asked, did you yell anything out? Hey, Rob, here I come. What did you do? And your answer was no. I walked out into the hallway, and I hoping that he wouldn't see me, and I had the gun at my side, and he was at the end of the hallway. Remember saying that before?
Yes.
But now he's coming back towards the bedroom. He's not at the end of the hallway, right?
He was at the end of the hallway coming back to the bedroom, yes.
So this guy that is either pushing or shoving you or holding you by the neck can now be in two places at once. He's either at the end of the hallway or he's coming back to the bedroom. Which was it?
It's both.
Both. Did you see him put your phone on the table then?
No, I don't. I don't know if he did or not.
And then it's your testimony that he comes at you. What was he doing when he came at you?
Oh, he was yelling at me, and I was screaming, back up, back up.
What was he yelling?
I don't know, because I was screaming, back up, back up. I don't know what he was yelling.
And how are you holding the gun?
Out in front of me, where he can see it.
With one hand or like this? Rob, I got a gun. See it? No?
No, it was pointed at him.
Like this?
Yes.
In the shooting position?
Yes.
Ready to fire?
Yes.
With one in the chamber.
Yes.
And at that point in time, all he's doing is yelling. Did he run at you?
I'm telling, screaming at him to back up, back up. I just wanted to leave. I didn't want to be stuck in the house with him.
Did he run at you?
He was coming towards me and he didn't stop.
Did he run at you?
He was walking. He didn't.
Okay, he's
was he-
walking. What did he do when he saw the gun?
We were so close. I don't know every single tiny detail. I just know it happened incredibly fast.
You don't know every tiny detail. How close did he get you before you pulled that trigger? Did he get this close?
He was.
Did he
was
get this
incredibly
close? How close? What's incredibly close? Right here?
You're really close.
Yeah? Hold your arms out like you're going to shoot me. Come on. Do what you did to Rob.
Objection. Sustained.
Stand up. Please.
Objection. Okay, sustained. Mr. Barr, if you were going to ask the witness to do something, then ask
Would
her
you
to
put your arms
demonstrate.
out like you're shooting a gun, please? Did he get this close?
Overruled.
He was there. It was
There?
very
And
close.
you're pointing at my chest, right?
I don't know. I just pulled the trigger.
And he could have went like this, couldn't he? He could have grabbed that gun if he was that
He was
close.
close enough, yes.
And then, you pull the trigger. Right?
Yes, I pulled the trigger.
But you don't remember anything after that until you come to. And you're standing there still in this position?
Yes, I pointed at the back wall.
And you're pulling the trigger.
Yes, I was attempting to pull the trigger still at the back wall.
Were you attempting to pull the trigger or were you pulling the trigger?
I was pulling, trying to pull it, yes, and there was no more noise.
Because before you said you were pulling the trigger, right?
Right, I was pulling the trigger, or trying to.
But you know now you can't pull the trigger on this gun when it's empty, don't you?
I don't know what you mean.
Well, do you hear the big trigger clicking? You know what a trigger sounds like when you click it? right?
Yes.
You don't hear that, do you?
No.
So the trigger can't be pulled.
Right.
So you couldn't have been pulling the trigger.
Okay.
But you said you were.
I was making the motion of trying to still do it.
And then you throw the gun.
Yes, I mean, I see Rob on the ground, and that was the first thing I just threw the gun.
And you're standing where when you see Rob on the ground?
I was standing at his feet.
At his feet.
Yes.
And Rob's 6 feet, right?
Yes.
So are you standing on top of his feet or are you standing a little bit back from his feet?
I was in front of in the stairs.
In front of the stairs, so a couple
Yes.
feet away from his feet, right?
I am sorry, I'm not good with the measurements. Where his feet are, and then I was standing by the stairs.
And so you threw that gun all the way over his body, over by the dog toy in the cat stand.
I'm running over to him and I diverted the gun, and I'm like looking at him going, Rob. And
And
I
you
tried
threw
to
the
see
gun.
if he had a pulse.
You threw the gun.
Yeah.
So wait, did you go look for your phone first or go feel for a pulse first?
I did try and feel for a pulse, and I was saying, Rob, and then I was like, God, where's my phone? And I looked for it, and I went looking for my phone,
But
and I'm thinking purple, because it's the color of my phone.
Before it was, the shots were fired, you see the body, then you go look for the phone, and then you check his pulse. Which one was it?
Yes.
Both.
Both?
Maybe, I don't.
Both?
I checked his pulse multiple times that night.
And then you go and try to do CPR to this man you just pumped 10 bullets in, right?
I didn't know that I had even shot him that many times, but I did try and do CPR.
I'm going to put on this screen what's been marked as State's Exhibit 3P. Which side of the body did you go on?
This time.
So you went on that side of Rob's body.
When I was doing CPR, yes.
Okay. You weren't on the other side.
No, not when I did CPR, no.
Today, you said you didn't know where the animals were when you got home. Right?
When I got home,
When you and Rob came home,
the dogs would have been upstairs.
they were upstairs.
Yes.
When did you put them down in the garage? Before you
I
called 911?
didn't put them in the garage. The police said they did.
Did you hear the police come in and say that?
In the last testimony.
So, the dogs, the same dogs that attacked and bit Rob on November 22nd didn't do anything to Rob when he was screaming at you in the hallway and doing all that.
They were probably scared.
But they weren't scared the other time when he was yelling at you and shaking you and she bit him. Scarlett did, right?
Scarlett was asleep on the couch with me when he came in. She wasn't next to me when that was happening.
Where was she? She's upstairs.
I don't remember where the animals were. I
When
don't
you-
remember looking for them.
When these dogs were how old?
They were 8 months, I believe.
8 months, so they're just little puppies, right?
They were probably around 50 pounds.
And when little puppies are like that, you got that dog gate up there, and they hear that door open, the first thing they do is come and say, "Who's coming in the house?" Right? They come and greet you, because you even said they greeted you and not Rob, and he didn't like that, right?
When he was screaming, I don't remember seeing them at the dog
So
gate.
when you came in the house, before he was screaming and you took the dog gate down, where were the dogs?
I don't know where the dogs were. They didn't greet me at the gate when that was happening.
Do you remember testifying before that they were upstairs when you got home?
Right, they were gated in so they would be upstairs, but I don't remember
But
seeing
they weren't
them.
locked in the bathroom.
No,
They weren't locked in the bedroom.
no,
They weren't locked in the spare room.
no,
They weren't locked in any room, right?
no.
But yet when you and Rob both came in that house, neither one of them came up to greet you, did they?
They weren't at the gate to greet us, no.
When you called 911, you told the 911 operator he's fucking dead, didn't you?
Yes, because there was blood coming up, so I thought he was dead.
You knew he was dead, didn't you?
I thought that was the possibility, but I thought maybe the medical people could revive him.
So at the police department, when you're asking if he's dead or not, are you just asking to look good?
At the time, I wasn't aware that I had shot him 10 times, so I thought that they might be able to save him.
Well, how many bullets did you keep in your gun?
When it's loaded, there's 10 bullets in it.
And you kept it loaded,
Yes.
and you never shot it before, right?
No, I had shot it once before.
You shot it once before?
I believe I did with Matt when I first bought it, yes.
Do you remember testifying at the last proceeding that you've never shot that gun before?
Wait, I don't remember if it was Matt's gun or if it was mine at the shooting range.
Now you're not sure. Did you shoot that gun before or not?
Like I said, I answered.
So that gun holds 10 bullets. You knew that, right?
Right, that because there's.
You know from your training and experience that when a gun's locked back like this, all the bullets have been fired, right?
Yes, but I.
Yes?
Yes.
Yes. So you knew that night that you shot that gun 10 times.
I never looked to see if the slide was locked to the rear.
Rob had never hit you before, had he?
Like punched me in the face? No.
He had shaken you a little bit.
He had shaken me, yes.
He had pushed you in the car a little bit,
He pushed me, yes.
but he'd never hit you.
No,
You never had to seek medical attention.
I never went and made a medical report, no.
Well, you didn't have any injuries, did you?
Not that I reported, no.
You left the party at 10:55.
I mean, I
Well,
know that
let me ask you this. If Brittany says, and you saw the pictures where the clock's right next to her door, right? If she says, when you guys walked out, it was 10:55, are you going to quarrel with that?
I mean, it sounds like it's about right, yes.
And it took you 3 minutes to get home.
He was driving incredibly fast.
But that's what you said before. It took 3 minutes to get home, right?
That's what I would guess.
So you pull in the driveway after that 3-minute drive, and Rob jumps out of the car and comes, rips you out, and takes you in the house. Yes?
That's correct.
How long did it take him to get you from the car to the bedroom?
I don't know, it was fast.
Fast?
Yes.
20 seconds? 30 seconds?
I really don't, I don't know. It was fast and awful.
So it was quick.
Yes.
And you sat in the bedroom for 20 seconds before you grabbed your gun.
I don't know how much time passed. It was fast, it was immediate.
Do you remember in that prior proceeding being asked, do you know how long you were in the bedroom before you grabbed the gun and tried to run out? Remember being asked that question?
I believe Ian did, yes.
And your answer was 20 seconds.
I mean, it's just a guess.
So you're in the bedroom for 20 seconds before you grab the gun.
Right.
And then you step out into the hallway.
Yes.
And how long did it take Rob to get from the end of that hallway, or whether he was coming back down the hallway, whichever it was, to this close to you to pull the trigger?
I was moving towards the stairs.
So you're going towards each other. So that could take, what, a couple seconds?
It was incredibly fast.
And then you say, 30 seconds after the body hits the floor, you're on the phone to 911. Remember saying that?
I mean, yes, it sounds right, yeah.
So in all, probably 2 minutes elapse from the time you get to the driveway to the time you're on 911. Is that a fair estimate?
I would say yes.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Redirect?
Yes.
Colleen, Mr. Barr asked you about the homeless shelter you worked at in New York. Do you recall that question?
Yes.
When did you work at a homeless shelter in New York?
Now it's probably been about 8 years.
Okay. So how many years, if we're looking at December 31st, 2014, how many years prior had you worked at this homeless shelter?
I mean, 5. It was
5 years?
Yeah.
Okay. And he asked whether or not you had done any research on the battered woman syndrome. Did you do any research on battered woman syndrome the entire time you were either dating, engaged, or married to Rob McKernan?
No, I didn't do any research like that.
So whatever Mr. Barr was discussing was something that you had learned 5 years prior.
Right, from my job at the homeless shelter.
And in that 5-year span from the point in time you worked in the homeless shelter until you were with Rob McKernan, had you been in any kind of abusive relationships?
No.
I want to talk about the June incident in the Loews parking lot.
Okay.
Did Rob leave that bar before or after he had physically abused you?
After.
Let's talk about November 13th. Did Rob McKernan leave November 13th, 2014 before or after he physically abused you?
After.
On November 22nd, in which obviously we've been talking a lot about that, did Rob McKernan leave before or after he physically abused you?
After.
And on November 14th, when he smothered you with a pillow, did he leave before or after he physically abused you?
After.
So Rob was not one to leave the house before he had hurt you.
No.
And you heard Mr. Barr describe these instances in a little bit. Did you feel that he had only pushed you a little bit in June of 2014?
No, he shoved me to the ground. I mean, when he was holding me with his hand over my face and around my neck.
And on November 13, when he's slamming your head into the side of the car, did you feel he was only slamming a little bit?
No, it was scary.
Okay. And November 14th, he smothered you until you were unconscious?
Yes.
So he didn't just smother you a little bit.
No.
And on November 26th, when he shook you and drug you by your hair down the hallway, did you feel that was only a little bit?
No.
Did you think you needed to take pictures of the scrapes on your hand from the parking lot to be able to prove it afterwards, Colleen?
No, I didn't take a picture.
You talked about a conversation that you had with Rob relative to you calling the cops again.
Yes.
And that was after the November 13th call to 911.
Yes.
Which, by the way, that November 13th call to 911, did you know there was some special button on your iPhone so you could bypass the unlock code?
I mean, no. I
Did you
didn't
punch in
try
your
and do it.
Did you punch in your code on November 13th, 2014, just like you did on December 31st?
Yes, I did.
What did Rob tell you about not calling the cops again?
He told me that he didn't want me to call the cops because no one's going to drag him out of his house. He's not going to let another woman take it.
When he was talking about the cops on December 31st, 2014, was that his normal voice as Mr. Barr described?
I'm sorry, on what date?
December 31st calling. Was Rob talking about calling the cops on that evening?
Yes, he was threatening that he would give me a reason to call the cops.
Okay, and when he tells you he's going to give you a reason to call the cops, is it in a normal voice or is he shouting?
No, he was screaming at me.
Mr. Barr asked you a couple questions about the finances in the family.
Yes.
What was the philosophy relative to the finances that you followed?
Dave Ramsey is a financial expert, and he's like cash is king type of guy. So you're supposed to pay everything in cash. And you just have a budget, and you say X amount is for clothing, X amount is for groceries, X amount is for bills. It's just how it went.
How much money did Rob need for his hair?
He had an $80 a month budget for his haircuts and trims.
Okay, and certainly you gave him that $80 every month.
Oh yeah, well we took it all out and put them in individual envelopes so you know how much you're supposed to have.
Let's talk about the patio. When you see Rob on the patio on December 31st, at Zach and Brittany's.
Okay.
Did you see something in Rob's nose between, I guess, his nose and the table?
Right, he had something in between him and the drugs to utilize to use the drugs. Yes.
Mr. Barr asked you whether or not Rob was shoving you at Zach and Brittany's house on December 31st. Did Rob ever hit you in front of anyone?
No, he didn't do that.
Was he too proud for that?
Objection.
Sustained.
Mr. Barr asked you whether or not Rob was close to you when you believe you pulled the trigger, correct?
Yes.
And had he walked that distance to get closer to you while you told him to back up?
The distance that you just walked?
Yes.
No.
Okay. How far did he walk, Colleen?
He was at the end of the hallway, coming like down the hallway when I came out, and I was trying to leave, so it's not that long of a hallway.
What were you saying to him?
I told him I was leaving.
Did you tell him to back up?
Yes, I yelled it over and over and over again, and he didn't.
And when you say he didn't back up, what was he doing?
Moving towards me.
Mr. Barr asked if he was close enough to grab the gun from you when you pulled the trigger.
Yes.
Did you believe that Rob would be capable of grabbing the gun from you?
Yes, he was very close to
Did
me.
you believe that Rob could overpower you that evening?
Oh, yes, easily.
Did you believe that your life was threatened?
Yes, I did.
Mr. Barr asked you whether or not the gun was loaded. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Was the gun loaded on November 14th when Rob McKernan pointed the gun at his head?
Yes, it was.
Did you load that gun that we have seen previously?
No.
Do you know who loaded it?
No, but I would assume Rob did.
If I can just have a moment, Your Honor.
You may.
Colleen, do you believe that when Rob was within an arm's reach of that gun that he had done drugs that evening?
Objection.
I had thought that Rob was on drugs and that I knew he was definitely drunk.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Mr. Barr?
You didn't see him do any drugs, did you?
I didn't see the white powder go up the straw into his nose, no.
And he shoved you to the ground after you punched him in the face. Right?
Right, because he was...
Right?
Right.
And on November 13th, when you pointed that loaded gun at him, was it loaded?
I didn't point a gun at him on November 13th. He pointed it at his head.
And November 22nd, you didn't think it was important enough to tell his mom that he grabbed me by the hair and my hoodie and drug me to the bedroom. Right?
I told his mom that we were having issues, yes.
Rob worked.
Yes, he worked in the oil field.
In fact, he brought home more money than you did, didn't you?
Yes, Rob did make some more money than me.
But you were generous enough, as Ms. Mills put it, to give him $80 a month to get his hair cut and his beard trimmed.
Right, that's the amount we agreed upon together in our budget meetings.
you didn't load this gun, how do you know there was one in the chamber when you picked it up that night before you shot it?
Because you would assume that it's always loaded.
You make a lot of assumptions, don't you?
Objection.
No further questions.
Sustained. You can disregard the last. It's already done. All right, you may step down. Want to take a break? Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, it is 10 after 2. We are due for an afternoon break, so we will take it at this time. Please, as always, do not discuss the case among yourselves or with anyone else. Do not allow anyone to discuss it in your presence, and do not form or express an opinion on the case until it is finally submitted to you. I'll ask that you report back to the jury assembly room we'll try to come get you at 2:25. We are in recess. Ms. Mills, you may call your next witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. Who calls Dr. Lubit to the stand, please?
Needs to be sworn.
Yeah, he does need to be sworn, and the bailiff just went to get him water. You just need to swear him in, too. Thank you.
Raise your right hand for me, please, sir. You solemnly swear to testify the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, sir?
I do.
Dr. Lubit, would you state your full name for the record, please?
Roy Howard Lubit,
And Dr. Lubit, what is your address?
165 West End Avenue, 3K, New York, 10023.
And what is your occupation?
I'm a psychiatrist.
And can you just give us kind of a brief overview of your education and your training?
I went to college at Cornell, then to medical school at New York University. After medical school, I did my residency in psychiatry and neurology at Yale. It was 4 years. After that, I did a child psychiatry fellowship in Boston. Then I did an advanced psychotherapy fellowship. And in 2001, after practicing and doing some other things, I returned to residency training and did a forensic psychiatry fellowship.
And which states are you licensed in?
Just New York.
And your areas of specialty?
Most of my time is spent doing forensic psychiatry.
Can you explain to the jury what a forensic psychiatrist is?
A forensic psychiatrist is a psychiatrist who does evaluations for court purposes. So I've done a number of custody evaluations. I've had cases where there was a question with someone not guilty because of insanity. Done personal injury cases. I've had many people who've had post-traumatic stress disorder or depression or head trauma after accidents.
Are you board certified?
Yes.
And in what areas are you board certified?
I'm triple boarded. I'm boarded in psychiatry and neurology. I'm boarded in forensic psychiatry and in child and adolescent psychiatry.
And what are your present positions?
I'm in private practice.
Have you ever had any academic appointments?
Yes.
And where were those at?
After I finished my fellowship at St. Vincent's Hospital, I was asked to stay on as faculty the next year. Then I was invited over to Mount Sinai to do teaching around post-traumatic stress disorder. I've also taught ethics in psychiatry at Einstein, and I've supervised medical students at NYU.
And have you been retained on both behalf of the plaintiff or the state and the defense?
Yes.
Do you have, can you give us a percentage of the times that you have testified on behalf of a plaintiff or?
Only that it's roughly equal. I don't know the numbers, so I don't know which one is slightly more than the other.
And Dr. Lubit, how did you become involved in this particular case?
I was called by your office. I can't recall if it was you or one of your, I think one of your associates called me.
Dr. Lubin, I am going to hand you what has been marked as Defense Exhibit X. And have you seen that document before?
Yes, it's my curriculum vitae.
Okay, and is it current?
Afraid not. It's dated several years.
Okay, is there anything then that you would like to add to that CV that you have in your hand?
I mean, there are some more talks, there are some additional publications. That's the main thing.
Okay. At this point in time, Your Honor, I would offer Dr. Lubit as an expert in the field of forensic psychiatry.
No objection.
He will be so designated.
Doctor, did you evaluate Colleen McKernan in this case?
Yes, I interviewed her for about 6 hours.
Can you explain to the jury what a dissociated state is?
Dissociation is a very strange mental phenomenon that can take several forms. The simplest form, and what many people have experienced, is sort of feeling spaced out. They can feel that they may be unreal, or the world around them is unreal, that they're only half there. Trauma victims often feel, or rape victims in particular, often feel that they are outside of their body watching themselves, that it's not happening to them, they're watching their bodies undergo it. And that's, the separation is to protect themselves from the pain.
Is it a defense mechanism?
Yes. At the more extreme end, we have dissociative identity disorder, which is almost impossible to believe, but it's real. I've seen many patients with various types of dissociation, and I've seen people where I'm absolutely convinced that they have dissociative identity disorder. So what happens is that there's a separate, normally we are aware of our past, we know what we did the last day, we know our childhoods, we're aware of where we are in the present, and we know our name, who we are. In dissociation, those three things get separated. So sometimes people can forget their past. Sometimes they don't know who they are. I saw one individual like this who came in after a close friend died. She was functioning. She had no idea who she was. A day later, when she was less anxious, things came back to her. So again, at all different levels, but it's this separation between normal parts of our experience. That's the hallmark of dissociation.
How can intense fear affect thinking?
That is, well, under very painful emotions, intense fear, horror, individuals sometimes dissociate. And they can, again, be outside of their bodies watching, or they can just go into a daze and not process what's going on. And if I can go to the other end of the spectrum, the experience that many people have had is called highway hypnosis. And hypnosis really enters you into a dissociative state. So you can be driving down the highway, especially if it's at night, and you can lose track, not just lose track of where you are, but stop processing. So part of your brain is alert enough to make the turns and to not get killed. On the other hand, your awareness of what's going on around you is greatly reduced. And if a car cuts you off, the car in front suddenly hits their brakes, you're going to be very slow to react, or you may not react at all to this more complicated new situation and tragically have an accident.
How is one's ability to assess a situation slowed down in a dissociated state?
It's greatly slowed, or could even be completely stopped, depending upon the depth of the dissociation.
Is it likely that someone in a normal state would continue to shoot bullets even after a threat had been neutralized?
Yes.
And why?
Well, it takes us time to respond. I like to make the comment that for those who are Star Trek fans, Commander Data, an android, would respond instantaneously. These wires, electrical currents travel the speed of light, and things can be calculated almost instantaneously, and he can respond. That's not how the neurons in our brain work. And it takes time for us to perceive something, figure out what's going on, realize that there's a change, and then to stop motions that may have become automatic. So, to give another example, when a child starts to walk, every step is deliberate. He has to think about every time to put the foot forward. By the time we're adults, unless we have some problem, we're running. And we don't tell ourselves one leg then the other. It just happens. And if something gets in our way, we have to send ourselves a command to say stop. And that takes a fraction of a second or a second.
Doctor, would someone have to meet all of the criterias of PTSD under DSM-5 in order to have dissociation?
No, absolutely not.
Sustained as to the foundation for that question, I think you're jumping ahead.
Doctor, is it possible for one to suffer from dissociation without a PTSD diagnosis?
Absolutely.
Well, that one's overruled. If you want to approach, we can approach. We can stay there.
Doctor, must one be diagnosed with PTSD in order to suffer from dissociation?
No, in fact, if someone's diagnosed with PTSD, you would generally not diagnose dissociation. If dissociation is caused by another disorder, you don't diagnose a dissociative disorder. You may note the symptom of dissociation, but you couldn't diagnose a dissociative disorder.
And I'm sorry, you interviewed Colleen McKernan for how long?
6 hours.
Okay. And during the 6 hours that you interviewed her, were you able to evaluate whether or not she suffered from dissociation?
Yes.
Okay. And what is your opinion in that regard?
My opinion is that she suffered from dissociation the time that on December 31st, 2014, that after making the decision that she had to pull the trigger, that she then dissociated. And the reasons of that, I believe that, are that she does not recall even the gun going off the first time, doesn't recall hearing anything. When she sort of came back to awareness, she reports that she was pointing the gun at the wall and was continuing to try to pull the trigger. And I've heard this report before from police about this happening. And that loss of the memory of what happened in between is classic for dissociation. And the type of stress that she was under at this time, in fear for her life, and then having to do something horrible to herself to save her life, to shoot her husband in order to not be killed.
I'm going to object to that last comment.
Sustained as to the legal terminology and the decisions and the basis for it. If you could just ask another question that requires an answer that doesn't involve that.
Absolutely, Your Honor. Doctor, based on your education, background, and training, do you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of psychiatric certainty that Colleen suffered from dissociation on December 31st, 2014?
Absolutely.
And why do you believe she was in a dissociated state?
Objection.
Council approach. And that particular objection is overruled. You can go ahead.
Thank you, Your Honor. Doctor, can you explain then why you have an opinion that Colleen suffered from dissociation on December 31st, 2014?
Several factors. One is that the situation that existed was one which would create so much emotional stress and pain that there's a good chance that someone would dissociate under that circumstance. The other is her description of what happened, that she's aware that she's been told whether she's pulled the trigger multiple times, but she doesn't remember more than starting to do it. She doesn't remember hearing the gun go off at any time. And at the end, she said she was pointing it toward the wall and continuing to try to pull the trigger. And by that point, her husband was on the ground. So something got in the way of her being able to process what was going on, to remember, and that's what we call dissociation.
And doctor, have you evaluated other individuals for dissociation throughout your career?
Many.
And have you lectured on the topic?
Yes.
Thank you, Your Honor. I have no further questions at this point.
Ms. Mills, Mr. Barr?
Good afternoon, doctor.
Hello.
The dissociative identity disorder you talked about, that's something that's in the DSM-5, right?
Yes.
And that's something that a psychologist can test people for to see if they have it?
You wouldn't test someone. There's no blood test you can do.
No, I'm
You would do
talking
an
about-
interview and you'd hear about the symptoms and you would hopefully speak to different alters and see how they reacted.
You can give psychological testing.
Well, you would do an interview.
Now, your opinion, let me strike that and ask you this. You talked about a child, when they first walk, their steps are deliberate, and as we become adults, it just becomes second nature, right?
Yes.
And would you agree, doctor, that someone who's trained as a security officer who has familiarity with a handgun and is trained in how to use it and shoot it is different than somebody who just picks up a gun and pulls the trigger?
Yes.
You're aware, doctor, that there has been prior statements by Colleen that she remembers the first shot.
she remembers pulling it, but she told me she didn't remember hearing the sound. But the other thing is that it's very common in this sort of situation that memories come and go. In fact, it's one of the possible signs of the kid's stress disorder, that at times you remember, at times the memory goes away.
You're aware, doctor, are you not, that she knows how long it took for the shooting to transpire?
I don't know. Well, she told me that she was told it by an expert in terms of how fast it probably happened.
So if an expert was told by her, if the expert says, Colleen told me it took 3 seconds for this to happen, then that's different than what she told you.
No, it's not different. I didn't ask her, I don't recall specifically asking her, do you know how long that period was?
So you didn't ask her that?
I didn't ask her, do you know how long it was, other than her telling me that an expert said that it could be done in like 2.5 seconds.
Well, the gun could be fired in 2.5 seconds. Were you aware that Colleen told another expert that this whole shooting transpired in 3 seconds? Are you aware of that? Yes or no, doctor?
I don't recall. I may have been aware. I don't recall at this time.
You used the term, there's a good chance that someone would disassociate.
Yes.
There's a good chance that someone else would remember all this, right?
Yes, some people remember, some would dissociate.
And there's some people that could lie to you and say they don't remember it, and you could not prove that they're lying to you, could you?
Absolutely.
And your whole opinion is based upon Colleen McKernan and nothing else.
It's based on the things she told me, but it's also based
Thank you.
on my...
Okay, Ms. Mills?
Would you like to finish the answer on what your opinion is based on?
Yes.
Please do so.
One of the things that a forensic psychiatrist always looks for is malingering lying. And there were things that we do in terms of our interviews, things we look for to try to assess whether the person is lying. I find it doubtful that most individuals would know that giving the story that they were staring at the wall, continuing to pull the trigger, would indicate that they had been dissociating. But again, I've heard this before from policemen.
Objection to what he's heard from policemen, Your Honor.
Sustained, ladies and gentlemen, I don't know that that comment was related to this case at all. To that extent, you are instructed to disregard it, and you are instructed to disregard what he has heard from policemen. You can testify to your own personal opinions. You can continue.
Yes, Doctor, and obviously without going into that, if you could continue your answer.
We look for things whenever possible that people would not know, that they would be unlikely to come up with. And that's something that I think is unlikely that someone would come up with unless it was real.
Thank you, Doctor. I have no further questions at this time. Mr. Doerr?
So, doctor, you're telling me that it's unlikely that somebody who just killed somebody would not realize that I better not tell anybody I remember this shooting?
No, I was saying that someone would be unlikely to think of that, saying that they were kept pointing the gun at the wall and kept trying to pull the trigger, but still pointing where the person wasn't anymore, that would be an indication of dissociation.
Are you aware, doctor, that her story has changed from from pulling the trigger to trying to pull the trigger?
These are not significant differences. When people tell stories,
Doctor, that was a yes or no question. Are you aware of that?
See, I'm not sure that when you try to pull the trigger and pull the trigger, I'm not sure even when you're talking about she did pull the trigger.
Did you know that when this gun's in this shape, the trigger can't be pulled?